Hey everybody, welcome to the Viper Pinball Restoration Garage for another short restoration video. I try to keep these manageable in time so you don't have to spend hours watching what actually took about 4.5 months worth of work, hundreds and hundreds of hours, a lot of patience and a lot of debugging. So if you've ever restored a pinball machine, you'll know what I mean. So I'm just going to get started here with a bunch of slides that show you kind of the before and after of things that were going on here. A little background on the game. This is a 1980s Bally pinball machine originally by the Midway subsidiary of Bally at the time, designed by Jim Patla. And the artwork is by Paul Ferris, and Paul did a number of games, and he's very well established as, you know, a pioneer of pinball graphics, especially into the 80s and 90s when it really changed into more of a theme idea, which was represented here by, the Space Invaders theme. Of course, in 1978, that was the video game arcades had everywhere, and the hypnotic dump 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 of the Space Invaders game really stuck in people's minds. And 2 years after, Bally licensed the theme, they licensed the copyright to Space Invaders to make a pinball machine. However, there was also a little movie called Aliens that had come out around the same time. So what they decided to do was to create a Space Invaders game that used some of the themes from the arcade game. However, a lot of the graphics that Paul created were kind of similar to what we saw in the Aliens movie. So what sort of happened, they produced 11,000 of these machines, but they had to pay royalties after a bunch of lawsuits. And what's interesting is they finally actually gave Fox a few games when the Aliens movie came out. This is also one of 5 wide bodies ever released by Bally. And you can kind of see here the likenesses, I guess, of, what was the 3-fingered alien and, of course, our 4-fingered pinball alien. A little more scary, I guess, than what it could have looked like, which was that. So they did a great job in really upping the game here, but got into a little bit of copyright trouble. Of course, this was the 80s. It was the Wild West when it came to copyrights. What was interesting about this game as well is Paul Ferris also made a comic book that is that went along with the game as a promotional piece. As far as I know, and I've researched, this is the only game that ever had a comic book that sort of explained where it came from. And it's available online for anybody that's interested, or let me know what you think. This is kind of an interesting picture of good old alien guy with the pinball coming out of him. Yeah, it's gotta hurt. Okay, so let's get started with the restoration. The Space Invaders game in particular spent most of its life on circuit, en route through different parts of southwestern Ontario. Ended up in an awesome barcade in Chatham, Ontario, and was put up for sale by the owner and purchased, but obviously needed a little bit of love and a little bit of care. On the right-hand side, you can see the wear and tear to the Playfield, which was pretty badly worn in a bunch of different spots. Once we got into the pinball restoration garage, we looked a little more closely at the area that was damaged, and you can see with just a little light sanding here, the playfield was beyond repair. We have some very talented artists that we use for some of the playfield touch-ups, if we can do that, but the intricacy here was just way beyond anything anybody could possibly do. So we looked at the options. There's a number of options available to do this. You could replace the entire playfield with a new playfield, which means removing everything from the top, everything from the bottom side, and really starting over, which is a great way to go. An awful lot of work, and it was something that we just weren't really prepared to do. There's also, for a lot of games, a hardtop overlay that is another good option. You basically clear the top of the playfield and you put this hard top down on top. But there's some issues with that as well, and not available for this Space Invaders game. So we decided to go with an overlay from Jeff at Classic Overlays, or sorry, Classic Pinball. And after some missteps, we couldn't be happier with the results. So we'll sort of show you how that happened as well. But obviously, you know, this was not a repairable playfield. Just kind of a number of mechanical things and other things that I wanted to point out at this point that weren't working on the game. The game was playable, so it did boot. However, one of the flippers wasn't working. Multiple controlled lamps were out. Both of the drop targets did not function. 2 of the pop bumpers were dead. The metal ball guide was missing inside of the little loop right here. Just was gone. Both star rollover switches weren't working. The bumper caps were all burnt. Plastics in the back here, you can kind of see, were all warped and wavy. Of course, the playfield was destroyed. And the rubbers really were, you know, in pretty bad shape. So that's what we were faced with, just, you know, on a very cursory view of this game. So step 1 in our process was to remove everything from the playfield. One of the things that's very important to do when you're doing that is to take lots of pictures with your phone, lots of pictures, and do them in stages. So for example, if you're taking apart the ball launch assembly, take it apart, put it in a bag, and take lots of pictures of it, figure out where all the screws were, and put everything that's together with it in a bag. So what I'm showing on the right side is a bag full of the right top spinner hardware that came off of that area of the game. Again, here showing you as you take another section apart, it's really helpful to do this section by section and make sure that you put every screw, every nut, every bulb, everything that came from that specific area into a bag and take lots of pictures. If I didn't mention it before, take lots of pictures. So here's just kind of another couple shots of the playfield cleared, still in the game. We had a couple of the pop bumpers still showing there, but virtually everything except for that and the flippers here were shown in this picture that we did remove before we went much further. Kind of another interesting point here is when you clear the playfield, there's lots of things that stick up from below the playfield. Drop targets, stand-up targets, all sorts of things. I'm showing you here highlighted with the arrow a stand-up target, and what we did with that was we removed the screws from the target, let it dangle below the playfield, and put the screws back into the spots of the playfield. So we reduced the need to kind of remember where they were or where they went, and underneath we did the same for the drop targets and some of the other items that poke through into the playfield. This is pretty important because of the next step that's coming up, which of course is preparation of the playfield, which is right now. So once we've got all those bits and pieces out of the way, we removed the playfield from the cabinet. Luckily, it had all nice, good Molex disconnects, and we started to sand the top to prep it for an overlay. And you can see here a number of different things that we've done. We've got the playfield on to 2 metal sawhorses. There's literally an inch on each side that you can place onto the sawhorses before you start running into issues with other things that are hanging down. So you have to be very careful if you use this method. Now, if you're fortunate and have one of the rotisserie devices for playfields, not a problem. I don't have one of those, so I use 2 metal sawhorses and clamps and pieces of wood to secure it firmly to the sawhorse. Using an orbital sander, of course, with a 600 grit paper on it. Takes a couple hours to run through and start to remove the old colored playfield. You can see here another shot of it. Interestingly, with a shop vac attached to the orbital sander, not much dust comes into the garage, so none at all, really. On the right-hand side, I'm showing you what it looks like under the playfield. If you remember, I was saying to tie up things. You can't see it very clearly under here, but the drop targets, rather than just hanging, they're zip tied up to the underneath of the playfield. And all the green painter's tape, those are covering holes that are through the playfield. So when you take the drop targets out and there's a hole in the playfield, tape it from underneath, and you'll see why later when we get into the clear coating of it. So playfield preparation, once we've sanded off the original artwork on the board, and this wasn't really something that was expected, we noticed all of the inserts started to pop out. So we decided at that point, let's just take them all out, let's clean them all, and let's re-glue them back into the playfield using a clear Gorilla Glue clear grip glue. Again, this wasn't something that we expected to do, but once we got started, we realized they were just popping out left and right. So why not take care of it properly at that point in time? Also getting ready for the clear coating and the varathaning of the playfield. Here's another little hint or tip. We used Max Original earplugs. Got a box of 50 of them, or a jar of 50 of them from Amazon. And we use those to stick them in all the little light holes and light socket holes and whatnot that you do not want to get covered in clear coat or any of the sprays that go on top. Also important to make sure the playfield is extremely level. This is in the Viper Pinball Restoration Garage, so there's a slight slope to the floor. You want to make sure that it's level, so when you apply the clear coat, it goes on nice and level and doesn't start to flow down to one side. Now this was a fun process. We created a kill room in our in the garage where we had the playfield ready to be coated with initially Krylon clear coat. And I'll give you a little story as we kind of go through here. I picked clear coat from Krylon. I'd used it before, familiar with the product. Went through our process of making sure we were suited up because this stuff really smells. Applied a coat, sanded, applied another coat, sanded, applied a third coat and sanded, applied 2 more coats and sanded, sanding in between with wet sandpaper. However, the Krylon seemed to fisheye pretty badly, and at some point looking at the condition of it from different angles and using light to see the condition of the surface of the playfield, we realized that the Krylon really was not a good method for applying the clear coat. So we kind of went back to step 1 and resanded, and we used varathane to seal the playfield. So once we had the playfield nice and sealed, we went on to the next step, which was one of the really important steps that wasn't really well documented anywhere. It's creating a hole template. On the left-hand side, you'll see the nicely varathaned and sealed playfield. And on the right-hand side, you'll see what we created, which was a series of just 8.5 by 11 printer paper that was taped together and arranged on the playfield in such a way that it was replicatable when we were to put it back on. We took a contractor pencil and we started to trace out every hole, no matter a screw, a post, a bumper, whatever was on the playfield. And you can see again, here's the rollover switches, but you can see here's all the screw holes and post holes that we've replicated over here, because once you put the clear overlay on, there's no way to know where those holes were. So big shout out to my wife for that one. That was her idea to create the template. Again, just using a pencil, took a couple hours maybe to go through. This is showing it with cutting the holes back out and using a very, very sharp X-Acto blade. We went through a lot of blades because they get gunked up. But the template was something that, at this point, you're sort of roll it up, put it away, and wait until you're ready to go with the next step. So as I mentioned, I got the overlay from Jeff at Classic Pinball, Classic Arcades. and couldn't have been happier with it. We had a misstep at first using the wet method of putting them on, and had to replace it with using the dry method, and I'll go over that in a little bit. This is just showing a picture of how we were lining up the overlay. You can see the overlay on top of the playfield. It's just a big piece of acrylic that's sitting on top of there. That's all nicely painted. We had a very bright LED underneath that was shining through. We turned off the lights in the garage, and we could actually line up the holes with the overlay. And then using a metal ruler, I clamped it at the one end, at the top, using a number of clamps, making sure that it did not move at all. And you can see a little bit of painter's tape here at the bottom to hold it in place. And that was pretty important. Getting that lined up was difficult. It was frustrating. It took quite a long time, but it was well worth it. So as I mentioned, we used the dry method. So there's a couple of schools of thought. One is you spray soapy water on it like wallpaper so that you can, when you put it down, you can move it around. There's another that says use Windex, because the brand name of Windex, because it's even slippier and will evaporate faster. Or then there's just the old, hey, stick it on and move on. So as I mentioned, we used the wet method first, and we had horrible wrinkling. We had problems with the playfield. It did not go very well at all. In fact, it looked so bad that Jeff gave me a break and sent me a new one. And we were able to use the dry method of putting it on. So once it's clamped at the top, we taped it down the sides about halfway, fold the paper back, or fold the overlay back, remove the paper, cut it off, lay it down on half, and using the roller that you see there to get any air bubbles out, you then do this. You remove the clamps from the top end and redo it, and it worked extremely well. Pretty anxious doing it though. So now it's time, once the new overlay is on and you've let it sit for a couple days, just to let the glue, do its thing, it's time to pull out that piece of paper now and lay it back over the playfield, and using an X-Acto blade, using a punch, redo all the holes. So literally line up the template, using your X-Acto knife, start cutting through the overlay, and making your mark on it, and again using it for every hole, every circle, every cutout, every drop target, throughput piece. Really saved the day. So that was making it look better. Now it is time to make it work better. And what I normally recommend to most people is that we replace the power rectifier board. In Space Invaders, it is in the cabinet, and you can see it here on the left-hand side. So under the cage is the big transformer. Those usually are fine. Nothing really ever happens to those for the most part. It's usually the rectifier board that you see. So these are the rectifiers here. You can see another one here, and there it is there. This takes the AC voltage and turns it into direct current into the voltages that you need for your game. Typically, there's a number of voltages: 5 volts, 6 volts, 12 volts, 40 volts, a number of them. And you can see, those voltages are all fused, but after 40 years, these get a little bit destroyed. You can see burn marks. A lot of power runs through these. When they were on site in bars, they were left on all the time. So these power supplies are usually the first thing that I recommend to be replaced, to be rebuilt. Again, here's some more pictures of it. I removed the whole unit from the cabinet. Some better pictures of what it actually looks like. Again, you can see here burn marks on the connectors. What's kind of important to know too when you're doing this is this is not a direct connect kind of replacement. You have to physically, with your soldering gun, solder a dozen or so wires to the back of the new rectifier board in order to make this work. The connectors all go to different parts of the game, but all of these wires come directly from the transformer, and it's really important that you have good soldering skills to be able to do that. This is what it looks like all replaced, all nice and shiny, including having the high voltage cover on it. Again, something that you know, it's the motor of the entire pinball machine, and if it's not working well, then you're gonna have trouble. Board repair and replacement. So now we're looking into the back box of the machine to see kind of what's going on. We've got the computer board, or the MPU, shown here. A number of different highlighted issues. We've got a bad old battery stuck on here. That's not the original. So the original one apparently was replaced, and you can see a little bit of corrosion that was starting to happen in these areas. Again, they put batteries on boards on these things at the bottom, and when they would corrode, it would seriously damage the boards at the back. Also showing you some of the Molex connectors that are on these boards. There's basically two sizes of Molex connectors, the 0.156, which are white Molex connectors, generally for power and heavier amperage voltages. And then there's these 0.100 Molex connectors that handle mostly data and data things. These ones in particular handle things like your displays and whatnot. It's a really good idea to repin these and at least check them for pins that have been broken. If you have display problems, if there's issues where things aren't looking very good, probably a pretty good idea to start looking at your connectors and replacing them. This is the power board. This is, sorry, the solenoid board. This is the board that handles all the things that bump and bang and bop in the game. So all of your plungers, all of your pop bumpers, your drop targets are all handled through a series of transistors on the board. I've got a couple things circled. There was, as you remember from the first slide, a number of the solenoids that weren't working on this particular game. A number of those transistors here were bad. Here's one of the bigger Molex connectors, two of them actually, and then the smaller ones along the sides here. Those all needed to be repinned. And after some discussions, we decided to replace the board rather than repair it at this point in time for this game. There's a lot of discussion around keeping it original as opposed to upgrading it to modern technology. Basically, you know, where we are, the boards get sent out. It's almost cheaper to get a new board, and certainly cheaper in the long run. The lamp driver board was also replaced. Again, similar methodology as the solenoid board. Let's get a new one in there. Let's make sure that all the transistors are fresh and everything's going well. There were a number of controlled lamps that were out, so we could have replaced a bunch of these transistors, but we ended up going with a brand new Altec board, which also eliminates any issues for the LED upgrade that was done. So here's sort of the Molex story a little bit closer here. What I'm showing on the left is a 0.100 Molex connector. Typically these have lots of wires stuck in them. You have three options. You can get a whole new plastic connector like I show here and repin every single one of them using a Molex crimp tool and 0.100 trifurcon connectors. Or you can go through each one. What you're seeing here is a paper clip that I stick into the little hole that allows you to pull out the wire and to check the connector. And what you see on this particular one, this connector is broken. So I need to replace that particular one. So after doing all that, we have everything done and looking pretty good. So you'll see on the left-hand end, it's working. It's right behind me there. You'll see, you know, custom apron cards, custom LEDs throughout the Playfield. The Playfield looks fantastic. All new apron cards, and again, the machine took about 4.5 months to refurbish, and it was quite the adventure. I'd like to give a couple shout outs, one to Matt, my buddy Matt, for helping out. My other buddy George, couldn't have done it without you, George. He was the master sander for all of this. And of course to my wife Luann, who well, put up with me doing this for 4.5 months, but also coming up with the template idea for the holes. That made all the difference in the world. So thanks for watching. If you can like me on Facebook, I'm at Facebook Rob or Pinball Rob on Facebook. And you can always like this and subscribe to my channel. I don't put a lot of these out there. I try to keep them relatively short. This will probably be the longest one you see. But thanks for watching.